This is going to be a good one. Buckle up. What's up with the economy? Are rates going up? Are they going down? We've got an inventory problem, yet there is 18% more supply on the market today than there was last year at this time. And joining me now to talk it through and talk all about it is a man that was just on CNBC. He goes from CNBC to one-on-one with Greg Sher. I mean, I am honored to have Divounguy on with me. He's a Zillow economist, housing and real estate expert. His resume is just completely off the charts. He's been there for almost 3 years. He's the founder and executive advisor at Quantitative Research Group, podcast host, columnist, senior macroeconomist. I mean, this economist, economist,
Economist.
macroeconomist. Yeah,
There
man.
you go.
I tripped all over myself. That's
So,
it's good to have some humility, and I certainly have it entering this. How you doing, my friend?
doing well. Thank you, Greg. Thanks for having me on the show.
I know I must have missed about 1,000 of your accolades. It's really great to have you on here. I did see you on CNBC last week. You ever get nervous for that? What are you more nervous for, CNBC or one-on-one with Greg Sher?
I don't know if I get nervous. I just want to make sure that I get my point across, right? And so you just take a deep breath and you go and tell them what's going on. That's it.
Well, I've had the pleasure of getting to know you over the last 6 months or so. I started recognizing you creeping up in mortgage lore land. Diego Sanchez, who's the president of Housing Wire, I know he's a big fan because he's always liking on your stuff, and he started to share. And then I took notice, and then I clicked on your profile one day and saw that you had that badge, man, that elusive top voice badge. And I'll tell you what, man, I became an immediate follower and hanger on then. I'm a groupie. I'm an official Orphe groupie. And really, you deserve it. You are a prominent voice when it comes to all issues around housing and the economy. So let's jump right in. New listings are up 12% on Zillow from a year ago. Number of homes for sale up 18% compared to the start of 2024. I sense when I read your material that you are more on the bullish side than the hawkish side. I mean, that when I read between the lines, I sense a lot of times you're like, calm down, people. Don't take any one report too seriously.
I think you're spot on. I watch a lot of TV, and what I see is like people panic over every single data point. We had existing home sales and new home sales surprise on the upside to end the year, to end 2024, and yet we get a week of bad housing data and everybody panics. And so I basically, last week I went on CNBC to kind of set the record straight. The reality of the homes that showed up in that existing home sales report in January went under contract sometime in December when mortgage rates were actually rising. And so, and at a time, of course, where there aren't that many sellers in the market in the first place. Housing is very cyclical, as we know. Sellers come back in the spring. You go into the winter months, and everybody kind of pulls back. And so, of course, the fact that home sales declined, it's no big deal, given that home sales were actually up on a year-over-year basis, right? So there was all this panic for nothing. And then I heard it was an interesting interview because the host was like, well, hold on a second. What about housing starts in January? Right. And housing starts in January actually were down mostly because of the weather challenges. We had an unusual snowfall accumulation. We had a massive freeze in parts of the country where it doesn't usually snow, right? Where it's not usually cold. And so you have all those things, and you had a big drop in starts in the South, in the Midwest, and then in the Northeast, where it was really affected. But then a 25% jump in starts in the western part of the country where there's no snowfall, right? And so I think it's really important to dig deeper, right? Not just look at the headlines, and dig deeper to kind of understand what's going on in the housing market.
When I read a lot of the analysis that's out there from the experts, I often hear that as the market begins to come out of the malaise, that it's going to be very localized in terms of the appreciation, the depreciation, the stabilization of house prices, and I'm not sure that's something we're used to. Can you tell us why? First of all, do you agree? Second of all, can you put that into context as to why this time around it's going to depend on where you live?
It's always dependent on what you. First of all, I agree. Housing is local, and it's always dependent on where you live. You have parts of the country that build a lot of housing, so you see places like Austin, Texas, Houston, fewer land use restrictions, so they've built. I believe it or not, Austin is actually kind of quite restrictive, but relative to the West Coast, they build a lot of housing. The Northeast, the West Coast, they traditionally haven't built a lot of housing, for a couple reasons. First, you have the geography, you have the mountains and the lakes and the ocean. And then, but also you have, very strict land use rules. Everyone, I think most people know Long Island, New York, for example, is one of those places that's super restrictive when it comes to, getting a building permit and building more housing. And so in places like that, where you still have a strong housing demand, and so some people will say, well, where does the demand come from? A lot of immigration starts on the coasts, right, in these coastal markets. And so you have strong increase in the number of families moving into the United States. You have big job centers, right? You got the tech and finance industries on these coasts. Of course, income is a determinant of housing demand. Stock market wealth, right? So some of these big companies, give their employees stock options and all that. So wealth, financial wealth, is also a determinant of housing demand. And so you have population growth, you have strong income growth, all of that contributing to strong housing demand near those big job centers on the coast. And at the same time, you don't have a lot of supply for housing because they just don't build enough. And so the pressure remains pretty strong.
Yeah.
In those markets in coastal markets, whereas in places that build a lot of housing, some of the pressure is being alleviated by the increase in new construction.
I want to take this in two directions. You mentioned, first of all, wealth. So something I don't think gets talked about a lot. I look for it. It's bouncing around in my brain, but I don't see a lot of economists talking about the crypto factor. We've got the largest cohort that's upon us right now in terms of new home buyers, Gen Z, and millennials hold the majority of the Bitcoin. And we've seen that tenfold almost. Should I not be looking at that as inflationary? That money is going to find its way into the market. Does that get talked about enough, or do you think it's going to largely stay on the sidelines and is not a factor?
I don't follow crypto all that much. I mean, I've seen a couple of reports that show that the majority of people in the space actually lost money. They didn't make any money, so they bought at the top and sold it, and then there was a big drop, and then they rushed out and sold, and so they lost money. So
yeah,
so that, I think that kind of tells a story here that potentially it's not going to be the kind of the what you're mentioning. The pressure is not going to come from there necessarily. If
got it. I just look at it as potential stimulus. That there's
Yeah,
a
I don't think so.
okay.
I'm not. I think a lot of people tend to get excited when it's on the way up. They buy high and end up running out when it's coming down,
Yeah.
and losing. But it's just in general, financial wealth is definitely a contributor to household spending, right? And so the fact that we've had increases in this record stock market increases during the pandemic, increase in savings that led to we had excess savings during the pandemic. All of those factors contributed to supporting household spending so not only during the pandemic, but also even after the Fed started raising interest rates. A lot of people were wondering, why is it that the Fed is raising interest rates so much, and yet historically we would see where the Fed would raise too much, and then we'd see maybe a big contraction, and right, and we didn't see that this time around. And part of the reason we didn't see that this time around is because households had all of this buffer in terms of basically ammunition to go out and spend. Also, the labor market was really strong, right? You had an excess number of job openings. I remember in early 2022, right before the Fed started hinting at rate hikes, a friend of mine teaches a class at Northwestern University, and asked me to come and talk in his class. And I remember we took a bet in front of all his students that we probably wouldn't go into a recession this time around. I actually ended up winning that bet. And the logic was the same. There was so much going on in the economy, right? And really high inflation, lots of excess savings, a strong labor market, that it would take a lot to cool down that economy. And this economy is still cooling, right? Inflation measured by the PC is still about 2.8%. Core inflation is still about 2.8%. It's taken a long time, and now we're in a situation where people are starting to think maybe interest rates might stay high for much longer.
Well, one thing that you wrote about recently, this idea of stagflation. So, that occurs when inflation is higher, stagnant economic growth, and elevated unemployment. I'm not that familiar with stagflation. I don't feel like I've been on Earth for over 50 years. I don't feel like I've seen many periods in time. So give us the lowdown, educate us on why you see that conversation becoming more relevant and how it would impact the economy should it present itself.
Yeah, I'm not saying we're heading there yet, but I'm the way economic policy uncertainty plays itself out is by affecting the supply side more. It turns out to be a supply shock, essentially, where if you have demand is slowing but supply shrinks even more, you end up with price increases. So you could end up with higher prices, and at the same time consumers are pulling back, businesses are not investing as much, and so lower demand, less hiring, because that's what uncertainty does to businesses that are essentially forward looking, right? I don't make investments for immediate returns. I tend to make investments for the future, right? I'm not going to hire employees because I think the economy is hot right now. I hire employees because I think the economy demand is going to be hotter in the future. And so, if you have a freeze in terms of business investment, and consumers also frozen in place, you could end up with a cooling economy and higher prices at the same time. And so that's why I think, and I think I brought that term up in a recent post of mine, because that's essentially what we're seeing in terms of economic policy uncertainty, the rise, the escalation in policy uncertainty, right? With the kind of the noise we're getting every day. There's something new is coming out of Washington, D.C., right? One day we have tariffs in the morning, and by the end of the day, tariffs are gone, right? They're off the table. And so all of that is affecting how people are thinking about the future. You're sitting there as a business owner, you're trying to forecast where you think demand for your goods and services is going to be. And if you get these mixed signals, you don't know what to do. So you tend to kind of pause and sit on your wallet and think that until that uncertainty gets resolved.
Yeah. Do you think that's why we're seeing the bond go down, or do you attribute that to something else? Because we were at a 4.6, now we're down closer to a 4.4. That's a pretty big drop in a short period of time. What is the market seeing and anticipating that may not be obvious to the naked eye?
Grow fears, right? Is the headline right now. People are afraid, lower than expected retail sales, the housing data that we got. The market is interpreting this as, potentially things are slowing down. And of course, when things slow down, people run for the hills. And that means just piling onto treasury notes, and of course, and that's why we've seen yields come down somewhat.
Yeah, so I see that. I see the yields coming down, and there's a lot of contributing factors last week. I posted about this on Saturday. You've got the Dow just coming off its worst week since mid-October. Treasury yields, as I mentioned, dipping. Consumer sentiment, University of Michigan's consumer sentiment survey dropped by a hefty 10% in February. That's double the initial report. But there's one thing I've not mentioned yet that really jumps out at me, and I want to get your feedback on it. Conventional loans are good, but FHA and VA are on shaky ground. In Q4 of 24, FHA delinquencies rose 57 basis points to 11%. And VA delinquencies went up 12 basis points to 4.7. Is there a story to be told and learned from that data?
I'm not sure yet. Until I start to see some forced sellers come on the market, which we're just not seeing that, right? So you don't see a lot of, I have to tell people all the time, look, this is not 2008 all over again. You just don't have a lot of forced sellers. You have people that come on the market because of life events. They had a new baby, or they're have outgrown their current home, and they're coming on the market. A lot of people have very low mortgage rates. The majority of homeowners have
About 65%, I believe, last I looked, are below 4%.
Right. So they have options, right? So another thing to remember here is, because of the rapid appreciation during the pandemic, many homeowners are sitting on record home equity. And by the way, home values in most markets are still increasing. And so they're not, I'm not worried yet.
Do you see a scenario where if rates go down 50 basis points, let's say that the bond rather goes down to 375 for whatever reason, right? That is going to obviously spur more inventory, more activity. Do you see any scenario where that occurs and home prices don't go up sharply?
It's hard to say. And usually when mortgage rates drop, you get both a response from the supply side and the demand side. And usually the demand side outpaces the supply side, in magnitude. Meaning that if you get a big drop in mortgage rates, you're probably going to end up with more sellers, and yet still, right, more people are listing their homes for sale, and yet still lower inventory. The inventory going down, right? The total number of homes for sale going down, because buyers will likely absorb all of the listings, all of the new listings coming on the market. So that's kind of what we see. That's what we see when mortgage rates go down. And so in an environment where you have inventory still so far below where it was before the pandemic, what I'd like to see is, I'd like to see builders continue to build housing, right? I'd like to see a persistent increase in housing starts.
Do you want to see zoning laws change?
Absolutely. I think that's a must.
How deep do you want that to go?
If we're going to close this, my estimates, we have about 4.5 million. We're short about 4.5 million homes across the country, and so if we're going to close that gap, we're going to have to see more construction. We're going to have to see the vacancy rate continue to increase, and I'm fearful that that vacancy rates might actually already be peaking towards the end of this year. If you look at housing starts, right, single family housing starts have been resilient, but multifamily housing starts have declined a lot, and they're continuing to decline. And so if you think about what happens there, right, you first homes get started, right, or apartment buildings get started, then, right, they go under construction, and then they get completed and delivered. And so if starts decline, you end up with fewer deliveries at the end of this year or early next year, and then of course, with fewer apartments coming online, the vacancy rate could peak, renewing rent pressures essentially.
Do you have an
And so
opinion? Do you have an opinion on all the unused government-owned land, the 600 and whatever million acres around the country? Of course, not all of it is inhabitable, but some of it can be lived in. Do you think the government should pitch in there in that way? That's one
I'll,
of the
I'll,
solutions.
I'll tell you what, whatever government can do to help builders build more housing, it should. And that means, making more land available for building. Zoning laws need to change. I wrote a book recently, and you can find it on Zillow. It's called Build the Middle. Co-authored a book with the Casita Coalition entitled Build the Middle. And you have things like minimum parking requirements that prevent new construction. You have things like, hey, minimum lot size requirements that don't necessarily need to be there. I think the market can do a good job at kind of regulating itself. And I'll give you a good. I'll make a good point here. When mortgage rates increased in 2022, more than doubled in 2022, interest rates increased. Land costs were already super high. Builders were already facing massive labor shortages. What builders did is they pivoted to building smaller. They built taller on smaller lots, right? They started leaning into higher density in order to kind of make the math work for home buyers, but also continue to provide more housing for renters. And so builders are not going to just sit on the sideline. When market conditions change, they actually change their behavior to accommodate for whatever demand is out there. So builders are able to do that, but they can't do that in places that don't allow them to do that, where localities are restricting where and how they can build. And so essentially, those local rules are hurting their own constituents.
Yeah.
Zillow surveys show that both homeowners and renters are increasingly okay with more construction in their own backyards. And so I think governments everywhere should start to kind of pivot and change in order to accommodate for higher density.
Do you have faith that this administration will lean into that? Will do that?
Well, it really takes place at the federal government can only nudge,
The
right? Can
local
nudge.
local level, right? States and
It's really at the
municipalities.
local
Yeah,
level.
yeah.
That's right.
Hey, Orphe, it's only about 5 more minutes. I have an annoying question to ask you at the end, but I'll wait till the end, all right?
Sure.
In between, I wanna talk about Zillow because your platform is so, so uber powerful. You steered me in the direction of one of your main pages. There's just so many resources there. Tell folks in the mortgage industry where they should be going to get the latest on rates and the economy, to read the tea leaves that impact their business.
Zillow.com/research. I think a lot of people don't know about the /research. If you go on Zillow.com/research, you'll find out everything you need to know about the housing market. We got our rental report. By the way, Zillow is the largest rental marketplace in the country. It's the MLS of rentals now, right? So you got everything you need to know about the rental market. You got everything you need to know about the for sale market in our monthly housing report. You have data, you have dashboards. You want to drill in at the local level, you can do that. We have almost every single home in the country, and we have data at the zip code level. So go ahead and check it out. Zillow.com/research
All
for
right.
everything you need to know about housing.
All right. Give us something to look out for here before I ask my annoying question. What are you working on? You take the floor here for a couple of minutes to give us some insights on something that's popping around in your brain.
I think right now is the question is, people are like, well, will buyers return this home shopping season? And I think as long as the labor market remains solid, buyers should return this home shopping season. Look, historically, a 1% increase in the number of sellers is linked to a 2% increase in the measure of home buyers. And so more sellers coming on the market should translate into more buyers also in the market. And I mean sales, and that means sales should recover from the 30-year low that we saw in 2024. Our current forecast is for 4.11 million existing home sales a rebound from last year. Also, builders have adjusted. I think it's important for people to understand that builders have adjusted to the higher for longer mortgage rate environment. If you look at the average price cut for builders, it's actually lower this year than it was last year. If you look at the share of builders cutting their prices, that's actually lower this year than it was last year. And so builders signs that demand remains pretty strong, and builders know exactly what to do. One advice, I think we can't talk about housing without giving advice to buyers out there. One advice I give buyers is to finance first, right? Always go and talk to a loan officer right away. Get your finances in order. What I love about the mortgage industry, lending industry, is that they usually give great tips to buyers. Here's a credit card you need to pay off. Here's how we can lower your mortgage rate in order to get you in the best position to buy. And so I think the advice for mortgage lenders, being equipped with the data and the right advice for people when they come to you is going to be key. It's going to be the differentiator between those who succeed and those who fail in this environment. And so again, go to Zillow.com/research. Make sure you understand local housing markets and you understand what's going on in your industry in order to be able to help potential home buyers. Last point, there's local down payment assistance programs on every single Zillow listing. So if you're looking for down payment assistance for your buyers, you can all the information is right there next to every single Zillow listing at the local level. Take advantage of that.
You mic dropped me. It was like you were ready for that question. I thought I would catch you off guard. Well done, my friend. Smooth as silk. I love it. So the question I want to ask you, most economists, I think, find this annoying. Where will rates be at the end of the year? I know it's like asking a weatherman, like, how many inches of snow are we going to get, right? Because, then I'm going to replay this in 10 months and be like, well, Orphe, you said they'd be this, and they turned out to be that. But come out on a ledge with all of us. What do you see in your crystal ball?
So look, I'm going to start with saying, look, it's very, very difficult to predict where rates are going to be, right? So, the economic environment, right? Expectations over economic growth and inflation are going to determine where rates are going to be. But I'll leave you with this. A couple of years ago, I was on stage at Inman Connect, and I was asked the question, are rates going to come back down, right? And my answer was, the only times I've seen rates as low as we saw during the pandemic, or at least 2-3% mortgage rates, was the bursting of the dot-com bubble, the start of a global financial crisis, and the start of a global pandemic, right? None of us want to go back to those episodes. And so I don't expect rates to decline significantly unless the U.S. economy cracks under pressure. And we know that if the U.S. economy cracks, the Fed will be there to rescue it. And so at Zillow, we think mortgage rates could potentially end the year in the mid 6% range. Of course, absent any new shock. But yeah, I really don't expect rates to go down to the 4%, 3% range. Some people thought rates would be back in the 5 range already. That just hasn't happened.
Well, that wouldn't be healthy. If we end up in an environment where rates are 3 or 4% again, we've got one of those catastrophes on our hands again. We certainly don't want that. But it sounds like you feel like the bond will be around 4%, maybe a hair under towards the end of the year.
I think. Look, we're going to continue to see some slight easing. I don't expect inflation to be reaccelerating. Like you might have heard some pundits talking about reacceleration and all that stuff. No, we're not going to see that. I think the Fed is doing a good job pausing and waiting to see what happens with the economic data. And so as long as we don't see another shock potentially coming from Washington, D.C., policy shock coming from Washington, D.C., the pause and wait approach is the right one. And then we're going to settle. Essentially, we're going to settle somewhere. Until then, mortgage rates are likely to remain highly volatile. We're gonna see a lot of ups and downs, but we're gonna settle, and I think we're probably gonna settle in the mid 6% range.
Orphe Divounguy, thank you, my friend. I really appreciate your time. This was better than I thought it could ever be. You are aces, my friend, and a great follow, by the way. This guy you have to follow. I've given you a couple of shout outs. Things happen in threes. This is the third time I'm telling everybody, write this name down and follow him. Great insights, as always. I appreciate it. Senior economist at Zillow. Orphe, we'll talk to you real soon.
You got it. Take care,
All right,
Greg.
coming up next Monday, we're going to dive right in headfirst to RESPA reform. The Mortgage Bankers Association recently wrote about a 40-page white letter to the administration, and they're hoping to have some RESPA reform. It has not been changed for nearly 50 years. So they wrote a white paper, and Justin Wiseman, Vice President, Managing Regulatory Counsel at the MBA, will join me. We're going to just take off the chains, man, have a real conversation about this push to loosen up RESPA and what it can mean for IMBs, both big and small. My thanks to Donna Chichevsky for her help pushing all the right buttons back there. I'll be at Housing Wire tomorrow. I can't wait to see everybody out there in Dallas, Texas, Clayton Collins, and all the rest. See you next Monday, folks. Have a great week. Bye-bye.